The signal lasted only 11 seconds. 2 words. Sent once. It came through a frequency the Viuric Empire had been quietly watching for 63 years. No warning. No build-up. No fleet movement. No weapon fire. Just those 2 words, and silence. Within an hour, every senior Viuric commander near the relay station requested immediate reassignment. No explanations were given. The ones who stayed refused to speak about it again. This is the record of what those 2 words were, who sent them, and what a single communications officer named Kaisnwa noticed that an entire empire had failed to understand for decades. The Viuric were not what humans expected from an enemy empire. They weren't aggressive. They weren't chaotic. And by their own standards, they weren't cruel. They were archivists. A civilization built on observation, on classification, on collecting knowledge the way others collect relics. When they discovered Earth, they didn't attack. They studied. They recorded everything. Human speech patterns, emotional reactions, fear responses, conflict behavior, even silence. Every signal we ever sent into space was captured, analyzed, and stored. Over time, they built a complete behavioral model of humanity. And according to their calculations, they understood us with 94% certainty. But that remaining 6% never settled. One commander, Rethus Vaughn, flagged it again and again. 14 separate reports. 14 warnings that something didn't fit. 14 times ignored. Far away from command decisions and war strategy, on a quiet relay station called Kappa 7, there was a woman named Kaisnwa. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't important in any political sense. She was a deep space signals analyst. Her job was simple: listen, record, label. Most days were silent enough that she spent hours just calibrating equipment that didn't need calibration. For 8 months, nothing changed. Then she developed a habit. While automated systems filtered and discarded irrelevant anomalies, Kai started writing them down anyway. By hand. In a small grey notebook she kept in her left breast pocket. When asked why, she would say only, "Logs get purged. Paper doesn't ask permission to exist." Her junior analyst, Corvin Tash, thought it was a joke. He laughed once, and forgot about it. But Kais didn't. She never stopped writing. Then, on a Tuesday, everything changed. No one could explain why it felt wrong. Tuesdays were supposed to be normal. Routine. Predictable. But this one wasn't. Across 17 relay bands, a suppression signal activated at the same time. Not a weapon in the traditional sense. Not an explosion. Not destruction. It was something far more precise. A behavioral inhibitor. It didn't stop people physically. It didn't silence systems. It made decision-making easier to surrender. Earth's response networks detected it within minutes. Confirmed it shortly after. But by then, the damage had already begun. And in command centers across the planet, people started drafting agreements they didn't remember choosing to write. And somewhere inside Kappa 7, Kaisnwa felt it too. A sudden, quiet certainty spread through her mind. A feeling that everything was probably fine. And that feeling scared her more than anything else she had ever recorded. Because in 11 years of listening to alien signals, nothing had ever felt fine. Not once. She opened her grey notebook and turned to page 41. A pattern she had marked months ago was still there. A repeating micropulse. 17 seconds. Cycling every 9 minutes. Across 3 Viuric monitoring bands. She had written a note beside it. A sensitization test. Not observing signals. Observing reactions to signals. That was the moment she understood something important. They weren't just being watched. They were part of an experiment. And the experiment wasn't new. It had already been running for a long time. Kais kept staring at page 41. The ink didn't look important. It looked ordinary. But the meaning behind it wasn't. A sensitization test. That meant the Viuric weren't just observing humanity's signals. They were observing how humanity reacted to being observed. And worse, they had been doing it for months without anyone noticing. Kais leaned back in her chair. The station around her was still quiet, but now that silence felt different. Not peaceful. Controlled. like something had been removed from it on purpose. She replayed everything she knew about the Vuric in her mind. They didn't waste energy. They didn't act without data. Every action they took came after observation, testing, and confirmation. That was their strength. And their weakness. Because it meant one thing. They believed everything could be measured. Everything could be predicted. Everything could be catalogued. Except humanity. That 4% again. The number Commander Rethus Vaughn could never accept. Not because it was large, but because it refused to shrink. Every new dataset, every new human conflict, every new war simulation, still left a residue. Something unclassified. Something the Vuric systems couldn't name. And anything they couldn't name made them uncomfortable. So they ignored it. That was their mistake. Kais looked at another entry in her notebook. Same page. Same pattern. A micropulse repeating across 3 monitoring bands. 17 seconds on. 9 minutes off. Over and over again. For 8 months. She hadn't reported it as dangerous. Not because she was careless, but because the system had already rejected it twice. False positive, the automated system had said. Background noise. But Kais had learned something in 11 years of deep space signal work. Systems don't fail loudly. They fail confidently. And the Vuric system was very confident. Too confident. Then she noticed something new. Her fingers stopped. The pattern wasn't just repeating anymore. It had changed. Subtly. Almost invisibly. A shift in timing. A correction. Like something on the other side had realized it was being studied. Kais felt a chill move through her chest. Because that meant only one thing. The test wasn't passive anymore. It was interactive. At the same time, far away in Vuric command space, Commander Rethus Vaughn was staring at the same kind of data stream. He didn't blink for a long time. The 94% model was still intact. Still stable. Still acceptable. But now it felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain to anyone without sounding irrational. And Vuric commanders did not tolerate irrational uncertainty. Yet there it was. Again. The 4%. Still alive. Still unresolved. On Kappa 7, Kais made a decision. Not a strategic one. Not an authorized one. A human one. She pulled out the manual broadcast key. It had not been used in 14 months. It was old. Older than most of the station systems. It worked on a frequency the Vuric had been logging since first contact. Not because it was important, but because it was persistent. Humanity's oldest habit in space. Keep speaking, even when no one answers. Kais placed her hand on the key. For a moment, she hesitated. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. Because once she used it, there would be no going back to silence. She pressed it. And sent 2 words. Kais pressed the broadcast key. And for a moment, nothing felt different.
No alarms.
No reaction.
No immediate consequence.
Just the quiet hum of Kappa 7 continuing its slow orbit through deep space. But she knew better. In space, impact is never instant. It arrives late, and all at once. The transmission went out on the oldest active frequency humanity still used. Not because it was secure, but because it was persistent. The kind of signal that refused to disappear even after decades of being ignored. And then, Kais spoke 2 words into it. Across 14 light minutes away, Commander Rethus Vaughn received the signal. It arrived like everything else in deep space. Delayed. Compressed. Cold. He opened the file. Listened once. Then again. And stopped moving. 2 words. Simple.
No encryption.
No military structure. No code format. Just raw intent. We know. At first, the command room didn't react. Because the words themselves were not dangerous. They were informational. But Vuric systems did not classify information by emotion. They classified it by structure. And this structure did not exist in their database. Vaughn pulled up the behavioral model. 94% human predictability. Stable for years. Supported by trillions of data points.
War outcomes.
Peace treaties. Civil unrest cycles. Psychological collapse patterns. Everything neatly catalogued. Everything neatly controlled. Except that 4%. Still there. Still unresolved. He ran the new signal through classification. Nothing. No category. No match.
No predicted intention.
Not attack. Not surrender. Not diplomacy. Not even confusion. Just recognition. And that was the problem. Because in Vuric doctrine, recognition was not supposed to be a response category. Only action was. Vaughn leaned forward. For the first time in his career, he did something that was not in protocol. He requested a full reassignment from the observation sector. Not because he feared human weapons. Not because he feared war. But because something far more dangerous had appeared. A blind spot. Meanwhile, across the network, analysts tried to stabilize the model. They added new variables. Reprocessed old data. Expanded human behavioral simulations. But every attempt led back to the same result. Uncertainty increased. Prediction accuracy dropped. And the 4% began to spread. Not in size, but in importance. Because now, it wasn't just a missing piece of data. It was becoming the only thing that mattered. On Kappa 7, Kai sat back in her chair. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply wrote one final line in her grey notebook. Same page. Same calm handwriting. A note that would later confuse every Vuric archivist who read it. They don't know what it means to be noticed while watching. And far away, in the Vuric Command Archive, Commander Rethus Vaughn closed the file. Not because it was solved, but because for the first time in 63 years, he understood something worse than an enemy. He understood uncertainty that was aware of itself. After the signal, we know, nothing in Vuric command space stayed stable for long. At first, they tried to treat it like noise. A human glitch. A coincidence. A meaningless phrase pulled from a random deep space broadcast. But the Vuric didn't build their empire on ignoring anomalies. They built it on collecting them. And this one refused to stay small. Within hours, analysts across multiple relay stations began reporting the same issue. Human behavior models were no longer aligning. Predictive simulations started failing in small but consistent ways. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough to be wrong. Again and again. That was what terrified them most. Not failure, but drift. Slow, invisible deviation from certainty. Commander Rethus Vaughn stood in front of the central display. The 94% model was still visible. Still labeled high confidence. But now it looked different. Like a map that no longer matched the terrain. He reviewed the original assumption again. Humanity was classified as a reactive species. They respond to stimuli. They adapt. They escalate or retreat based on pressure. Simple cause and effect. That was the foundation of Vuric prediction systems. But we know didn't fit that structure. It wasn't reaction. It wasn't emotion. It wasn't even communication in the traditional sense. It was acknowledgement. Directed acknowledgement. At the observer. And that created something the Vuric had never accounted for. A feedback loop between observer and observed. Back on Kappa 7, Kai Noir watched the response signals carefully.
No retaliation. No aggression. No counter-broadcast.
Only analysis. Only silence. Which told her everything she needed to know. They were thinking. Not reacting. Thinking. She turned a page in her grey notebook. Page 41 was already full. So she started a new entry. Her handwriting stayed calm. Almost clinical. If they understood us completely, they would not hesitate. That was the second thing the Vuric failed to understand. Humanity didn't need perfect understanding to act. It only needed awareness. And awareness had already been achieved. Across the network, Commander Vaughn received updated projections. Each one worse than the last. Not because humanity had changed, but because the model had finally started to admit it might be incomplete. And that admission broke everything built on top of it. The 4% was no longer a footnote. It was no longer a margin of error. It was becoming the center of all uncertainty. Vuric doctrine had no word for this state. So they did what they always did when language failed. They attempted to contain it. New classification rules were drafted. New observation protocols activated. New suppression theories proposed. But every solution required one assumption: that humanity's behavior could still be measured from the outside. And that assumption was already gone. On Kappa 7, Kais leaned forward again. The station was still quiet. But now it felt different in a new way. Not like silence under control, but like silence waiting. She closed her notebook for a moment. Not because she was done, but because she had already said everything that mattered. 2 words had left Earth. And they were still traveling. Still spreading. Still reshaping every system that tried to understand them. Because we know was not a message meant to inform. It was a message meant to change the relationship between watcher and watched. And for the Vuric, that change had already begun. The Vuric Empire did not collapse. It did something worse. It paused. Across command sectors, fleets stopped making long-term predictions. Not because they were ordered to, but because prediction itself had started to feel unreliable. Every simulation now carried the same quiet flaw. Humanity could not be fully reduced to output models anymore. Commander Rethus Vaughn stood alone in the observation chamber. The 94% model still existed on screen. But no one trusted it the way they used to. Even the number itself felt hollow now. 94% confidence in something that might already have changed. He replayed the signal again. We know. Just 2 words. No threat. No demand. No declaration of war. And yet it had done more damage than any weapon in recorded Vuric history. Because it didn't attack the body. It attacked certainty. For the Vuric, certainty was everything. It was their structure. Their identity. Their way of surviving the universe. If something could not be predicted, it could not be safely engaged. If it could not be safely engaged, it had to be catalogued. And if it could not be catalogued, it had to be avoided. But humanity had done something new. They had made themselves aware of being catalogued while it was happening. And that changed the rules completely. On Kappa 7, Kais Noir was finally called in for debrief. 9 days of questions. Repeated over and over. Who authorized it? What was the strategy? Was it coordinated with Earth Command? Was it a psychological countermeasure? Was it a trap? She answered the same way every time. No. 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 There was no plan. No operation.
No hidden fleet.
Only observation. And a conclusion drawn from it. They never believed her. Because civilizations like the Vuric did not understand decisions made without structure. To them, every action had to be part of a system. Every system had to have intent. And intent had to be traceable. But Kais had done something they couldn't process. She had acted on understanding alone. Later, her grey notebook was archived. Page 41 was flagged. Not because it contained classified strategy, but because it contained something far more dangerous. Proof that observation can become awareness. The final Vuric report on the incident was never made public. But one line leaked into internal archives. Humanity demonstrated a behavioral state not present in any catalogue. Informed self-observation under external analysis. No one had a category for that. So they left it blank. Years later, Commander Vaughn added one final note before retiring. Not a solution. Not a theory. Just an admission. We did not misunderstand humans. We misunderstood what it means to be understood. And somewhere, in a sealed archive labeled Signals Miscellaneous, a grey notebook still exists. Page 41 has a small asterisk.
No footnote. No explanation.
Just a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous signal in the universe is not a weapon, but a simple truth spoken at the exact moment someone realizes they are being watched.